Good morning, everyone. My name's Jules. I am the speaker liaison for iCAAD. Welcome back to this morning's sessions. It's my greatest pleasure to introduce Mark Drax. Mark is an addiction recovery coach. Mark turned his experiences with early trauma and addiction into a coaching practice specifically aimed at helping people apply addiction recovery tools in a realistic and sustainable manner. He works with individuals and presents workshops on matters like shame, honesty, and vulnerability. Mark's presentation is entitled We Repeat What We Don't Repair, From Addictive Secrecy to a Liberated Self. The presentation will focus on how secrets keep us sick and the dysfunctional adult behaviours that are repeated unless they are addressed. This presentation looks at the impact of shame that leads to emotional reactivity that is disproportionate to the perceived emotional threat. The subject is such an important issue, so it's over to you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome, bright and breezy, second presentation of the conference. I'm flattered that you're all here to fill the room. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump straight in because we don't have a lot of time. 60 minutes is not a lot of time. I have a lot of information to share with you. Who is aware that that is true? You see, I feel sad that there are very, very few hands in the room that are going up. To me, this is one of the now most important things that I, as a coach, working with the men that I do, can try and do to help stop men abusing women. Who has seen recently this in the paper, the story of Sally Challen? Again, few hands. Well, I'll tell you the brief story of Sally Challen. In August 2010, she came across to the house she had been sharing with her husband of 30 years. He demanded his breakfast in the usual way, and she made it. She discovered that very morning things on his phone which proved he had been doing things behind her back. So as he bent over to eat his cornflakes, she took a hammer to his head and bludgeoned him to death. She hit him 20 times and killed him. To make sure he was dead, she shoved a tea towel in his mouth and then left the house and went back to her house and got on with her life for the rest of the day. She left a note on his body saying, "I love you." The following morning she drove her son to work, and then she drove herself here. Who knows what that is? They're the cliffs of Beachy Head, indeed, on the south coast of England. It's where many people go to die who've given up for whatever reason. It took several hours for a suicide prevention team to talk her off those cliffs. They did. She's now going for retrial because of that law that's come in since her sentencing. And there's a very good chance she will be freed, having already served, I think, 8 years of a life sentence, and be allowed to join her children. And it's not only her children that are supporting this, it's his family as well, which is apparently, according to the press I've read, the first of its kind, where both sides are united in supporting her because they now know what she went through for 30 years. On the 6th of September last year, at about 8 o'clock in the evening, I found myself sitting right where that little red circle is. I'm 51. I was 50 then. No, I wasn't. I was 51. Good God. I'm 50. My birthday is August. How did I get there? Why did I? It wasn't to see the view. I arrived after a 2-hour drive from my house, having gone through what I now can tell you was the worst day of my life. And there's uncanny similarities, not only to the fact that Sally Challen found herself sitting on that same cliff almost 10 years before me, but the reason behind it. And that's what I find so fascinating, is that, as it happens, the perpetrator in that case was killed by her wife, his wife. In my situation, my girlfriend just left me. And it was because of that I drove to Beachy Head that night, intent on dying. Why did I find myself there? Well, I hope that over the next hour I will answer that question, because to me it's inextricably linked as to how and why I came to abuse the last girlfriend I will ever abuse, and how Richard Challen managed to get away with abusing his wife for 31 years, and how tragically many, many men do abuse women because they don't know what they're doing. And wives sit in relationships desperate for this connection, desperate to not be alone. Well, I now know what it feels like to be alone, because I've been alone for the last 7 months, and thank God for it. Because I finally stand here able to be honest with you for the first time in my life. So let's go back to the very beginning. That was the 4th of August 1967. My darling mum holding me the day I was born. That's a very important picture, because what I need you to know is that that happened very seldomly. What happened far more often was this. This is the nanny who was brought in to look after me from the day I was born. She looked after me for the first 4 years of my life. I don't know what you think of that lady in that uniform, but this was 51 years ago, and it was a different time. Rich families that could afford a nanny were only too happy to pass their children across to some person who hopefully would take care of them, or maybe not. And this is where my life changed. She was a smacker. I didn't know that. I don't know to this day if my parents know that. And it doesn't matter anymore. What is important is that I now know that for the first 4 years of my life, I was being quite badly abused. And interestingly, I didn't even know that until I went to Peru in 2017. I found myself on a plane to Lima, and I went to a very well-regarded ayahuasca retreat in the northeast of Peru for 3 weeks. And I, with all respect to you, don't particularly care what you think of South American plant medicine and its ability to help or hinder. All I can tell you is that it showed me things that no therapy for 14 years and no discussion with anybody else had ever shown me. I actually writhed in agony one night on the jungle floor, and I saw Nanny Berek's face as clear as I can see yours, or yours right now. And I lay there screaming, please don't do it, stop it, stop it, stop it. I then had that ironically witnessed by my cousin, who I found myself talking to in January last year, having come back from the Amazon. I was just shooting the breeze with my cousin, who was 4 years older than me, who used to spend a lot of time with me as a child. And when I started describing what I then had discovered to be true, she went, God, don't you remember what she did to you? And I went cold and said, no, why do you? She went, I was terrified of her. I regularly watched her pull down your pants and trousers and beat the hell out of you. Why don't you remember this? And I said, well, I was 3, I was 2, I don't remember a thing, not consciously. So to have that witnessed was very precious to me. What I now know to be true also is that treatment, that experience, literally split me in two. It split my personality. I wasn't conscious of it, but I'd already started to amass within myself the beginnings of addiction, the beginnings of rage, the beginning of anger. I'd already been biased to see life through a terrified lens. So, if you like, this is a character we all know too well. I stand here very accepting of the fact that I've lived as this character for most of my life. Didn't know it. If you told me, I'd have laughed at you. But that's what I now know to be true. I'm going to play you a short video, just to drive home a little of what I'm talking about.
There's something inside. Can you see what's inside the box? Can take the lid off. Is there something in there? There's a green cone. I'm going to put it back inside the box and put the lid back on the box and close it up. Can I see that? Thank you. Let's see what else we have. Look at this. See? Look at this. There.
Hi, Teresa. I'm going to sit here and read a magazine.
Okay. That's Kelly. Kelly's going to sit and read a magazine. Kelly, look at this.
That's aggravating. That's so annoying.
Oh, I thought it was really interesting.
Well, that's just your opinion. It's aggravating.
see that? Thank you.
I'm gonna go now, Teresa.
Kelly's going bye-bye. Kelly went bye-bye.
How's that made you feel? I understand. Thank you.
I had a huge flashback to something very similar I mean, I experienced as a child.
I'm sorry you went through that. Thank you. That's 2 minutes of a child's life, and one hopes this was experimental, and one hopes it was taken very good care of, little fellow, because he's so beautiful, and no harm was done to him. If you now transpose that and extrapolate it out over the first 4 years of my life, and understand that by the age of 4, I was a Jekyll and Hyde who was terrified of women and also hated them in equal measure. I'm a long way past this little fellow who's scared of a loud voice. And this is what happened to me. I became this rage that was then instilled into me, which has taken me 51 years to finally recognize and be able to stand here and actually share with you. My first addiction was anger. You can probably understand why now. I have a lot of work, including a return to a treatment center in October, November last year. I have finally realized that anger, my use of it, totally subconsciously and not intentionally, obviously, was the way I was expressing myself. My mother banned me from having a metal spade on the beach in case I had it on my younger brother and split his head open. I was going up to girls at my day school and lifting up their skirts and watching them scream and enjoying it because it gave me power that I hadn't had. I was hurting animals. I was killing animals, beetles and birds. My rage was coming out in tragically dysfunctional ways. And the sad thing is, no one stopped to ask why. I was seen as the black sheep of the family. I was seen as an errant, bad, naughty, noisy, and bad-tempered, very bad-tempered little boy. Well, unfortunately, it led to addiction. What is an addiction? Well, this is a quote I found. Addictions are the strongest frightened parts of your personality. The greater the desire of your soul to heal your addiction, the greater will be the cost of keeping it. And wow, what a cost. Quite a cost. I pause and just take you through a few family pictures because I want to help you understand the family dynamic in which I grew up. So there I am as a little kid on my 3rd birthday. Interesting photograph. If you look at my face on my 3rd birthday, I don't look too happy about it. That's because I now understand the woman standing beside me is the woman who'd been abusing me. Again, I didn't know this until quite recently. Another family photograph of me as a page boy, at whatever age, 5 or 6, my younger brother and I dressed to go to school. The dynamic I hope you're starting to see here is one of an incredibly strict family. More family images. You see we're all dressed the same. We are told to speak the same, eat the same, brush our hair the same, behave the same. A lot of apology in my family. My father never did anything wrong, of course, and Mum did a lot of apologies. So I grew up very unable to express myself. I was expected to be the 6'8" man I am today. I wasn't 6'8" then, but I was a lot larger than my size, my peers, and already expected to be this perfect little English gentleman. Well, on the outside I was, and by God I made sure I was, because if I wasn't, I got punished. Now the couple more family photos, that was actually my parents' 60th wedding anniversary on the 8th of April 2017, and that was a very similar scene, but only 2 weeks ago on the day of my mother's funeral. What didn't happen in our family? Well, what didn't happen is that nobody talked about these things. They were not allowed. If you cried, you were told to grow up and stop crying. A lot of the time I spent very much on my own, because a surefire way to have fun in my family was to provoke Mark, because my God, you got a reaction. You got a huge reaction. You got a foul-mouthed, door-slamming, angry little boy doing what they kind of knew they would get. It was kind of family sport. That's okay. I don't hold it against my 4 brothers to this day. In fact, I love them very much. So why do we start to do the things we do? Well, they're known as adaptive strategies. And mine were anger, secrets, and lies. Anger I've discussed, but the even more debilitating ones would become secrets and lies. So I lived in my own world. I spent a lot of time on my own. My younger brother was born when I was almost 4. My elder brothers were all 3 together. They went off to school, so I was on my own for quite a period of time. It's half the time with that abusing nanny, the other half, luckily, with a much better nanny. But I learnt that it was my world, and you were not coming into it. So if I was told not to do something on the farm on which I grew up, I did it, obviously, because it was basically a way of getting back, taking my power. So if I was told not to go to a certain barn, I went to the barn and played, and I came back with straw in my pockets. I lied about where I'd been, because guess what? The consequences of lying were quite severe in my family. This is something I found online. If your child is lying, it means you overreacted to the mistakes in the past. I happen to believe that. I happen to think I'm a witness to that. I learnt to lie because I didn't want to face the consequences. The consequences were way too painful, including the occasional beating from my father, or worse still, the shaking from my mother. When your mother grabs hold of you by your upper arms and you're about 7 or 8, and she shakes you very strongly, in that moment, you think you're going to die. And I did, and it happened, sadly, on more than one occasion. So funny enough, that and when you're looking into the eyes of the woman who is supposed to be protecting you, and she hasn't. I mean, let's face it, the first 2 people to abuse me on planet Earth were both women. A nanny who physically beat me, and a mother who didn't stop it. I'm not blaming her now. She had no idea what was going on. But that's the reality. So I happen to believe that. This is another thing I found online, which when I stumbled across this, I literally burst into tears at my computer. And you can replace the word parent with anybody. Aunt, uncle, doesn't matter. But the point is, when a child is being abused on any level, whether it's spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, doesn't matter, it doesn't learn to hate the person that's doing it. It learns to hate itself. And that's what I did. I did it with gusto. And guess what? I became an unbelievably defiant little boy. I didn't want you in my world. I learned to defend myself viciously. I started attacking my younger brother, beating him with biscuit tin on one occasion. No one ever stopped to ask why. And that's all before the age of 8. And then at the age of 8, I get sent here. And you might think that's a prison. Well, it looks like one. Actually, it was a boarding school. It's been closed since 1988, thank God. It was one of those classic British boarding schools of the Victorian era. That's some shots I literally found online. I typed in West Down School, good old Google, and I found those images. It was quite haunting when I found them. That's the headmaster. He was an alcoholic. Jerry Corns, supposed to be a hero because he won some gold medal at some Olympics. I can tell you he wasn't a hero to me. At that school, things happened to me which I'm not going to repeat because there's no need, but you can probably imagine it. Whippings, beatings, all manner of things. For 3 years, I would say I was ritualistically tortured. I was this blonde little kid who couldn't defend himself. The masters at that school, most of them, today would be in prison. They're all dead. The police actually checked this out for me a few years ago, which is a relief. Brings me closure. So I went from that school to the next one. The bullying continued for a while. That's a typical public school. Doesn't matter which one it is. Well, here a transition happened. I'm now finally getting into my teens. I'm getting a little bit bigger. I discovered a thing called the gymnasium. I discovered the weights, the gym, the dumbbells. And of course, that was a new addiction, wasn't it? Oh yeah. I was a skinny little kid. I was a matchstick. And so let's go in the gym. Let's pump iron. So I morphed from being the victim to the perpetrator. Because I finally got a bit of strength. And I, inside myself, of course, I suddenly realized when I thumped a guy once because he was bullying me, finally Drax was big enough. And Drax suddenly became a threat and the bullies backed off. And I thought, well, hey, now I can do this. No one's ever going to hurt me again. So unfortunately, I started pushing people around. I almost got expelled from my school for throwing a guy in the river. I don't, to this day, think it was bullying. It was shenanigans. We were having a tussle. Unfortunately, the guy I threw in the river was a lot smaller than me, by default, and it got discovered, and I was almost expelled. I was sent home for 2 weeks, but you can imagine how well that went down with my parents. To help me understand my anger, I didn't know I was angry. I just saw my right to behave and destroy property, to kill birds with a catapult, to fire a catapult through digger windows in the local sandpits. I was crazy. I saw that as my right. Because you know what? Fuck you all. Because that's where I was. The society was a dangerous place. People were a dangerous place. Women were particularly dangerous. I'd been dumped at these two schools despite all my begging not to be. So I wasn't too happy with people and society. And this voice from the past landed on my in tray in January last year. I'm going to read it. You won't remember me at all, but I remembered you the other day from the time at Bradfield, after a conversation concerning another Drax on Facebook. I recall you as being furiously angry with the world, and if I'm honest, Mark, perfectly happy to pass that anger around. Well, after reading your website, I now know why. I started to vaguely remember this guy, but this is a guy who witnessed me at school, possibly was even frightened of me at school, who took the trouble 30 years later to write that to me, just because he happened to see my name pop up on Facebook. Amazing. So, was I angry at school? I think so. It was actually a very, very helpful affirmation to me at the time. Shocking, but helpful. So what is suppressed anger and rage? I've suppressed anger for most of 50 years. Haven't always been very good at it. It's come out sideways on many occasions. And the most notable place it's come out is in relationships. You all know this. These are typically some of the things that happen when you suppress anger, and then it comes out like a pressure cooker. There's a big bang and something goes off. Well, in my case, it was my temper. My temper proved too much for one very brave lady, and in 2004, she had enough, and she left me. But she left me with gentleness and kindness. She's the first girlfriend who'd ever actually done that. She left a whole bunch of paperwork on my kitchen table for SAA, for Sex Addicts Anonymous, because she kind of had a hunch that when I said I was with friends for the weekend, that actually I was doing a lot more than drinking wine or whatever. She was right, and I crashed into a treatment centre. I went from here to here. I went from this self-imposed person thinking I had a right to behave as I did to pulling out in front of a truck on the evening of the 7th of July, 2004, and almost driving straight into the front of it. I didn't, otherwise, well, I'm still here. And that treatment centre started my journey of recovery. There are many, many addictions, as I've already shared with you. Mine happened to be sex. Why was that? Well, I can tell you now. When I was 11 at that boarding school, I can remember, I won't describe it, but I can remember very clearly, standing here today, the very first time I masturbated. It gave me such relief, but not just of a sexual nature. I went into myself, and I buried all the pain of what was being done to me, and I suddenly discovered something that could take the pain away. Now, I might have reached into my father's drinks cabinet and might have discovered a whiskey like that, and I might have become an alcoholic. I believe that moment, aged 11, set me on the destructive course that happens to be sex addiction. So now you've got a rageful, angry young boy who's discovered to masturbate and learnt how to bury all this pain. Not a good recipe for having a healthy life. And I didn't. Addiction, to me, is a symptom of a problem. It is not the problem. There's a wonderful quote from Desmond Tutu who says, we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. Well, what I've done with the first part of this presentation is to help you understand why I fell in the river. My first treatment centre started the job of pulling me out 15 years ago. It started the job of helping to understand and explore the why, not the what. The what was bloody obvious. I was destroying relationships, property, killing things, animals, tragically, and doing all manner of extraordinary behaviours. But again, no one asked why. My parents never asked why. The schoolmasters didn't ask why. So why has become a very important word in my life. Johann Hari talks about the opposite of addiction not being sobriety, but being connection. But when you've had zero connection, when you've not been allowed to express yourself, when you've felt too frightened to express softer, gentler sides of yourself, particularly femininity. In my family, and of course in the era, the concept of being a man being even remotely soft, well, you just considered gay, homosexual. And that, of course, back in those days, was demonized. And today, thank God, it's not. So how do we connect? Is this how we connect? Well, this is how a lot of people think we connect. I don't think it's automatically a healthy way to connect. They have their uses. I think that one is particularly powerful. And I've got proof. You type into Google people on their phone, and you'll find evidence. Dozens and dozens of photographs. That's a stock image. Okay? This is an image I took outside my own kitchen window within the last 2 weeks. I blotted out the faces because it's only fair. He didn't know I was taking the photograph through my window. But I stood there washing my dishes and thought, for God's sake, put the phone away and watch your kid. She's going to fall down the steps. So you see this, you walk out into the park, you'll see it right now. People sat there doing this. That's how most people think we connect today. I don't agree. You try and find someone, that photograph isn't on their mobile phone. They're going to get run over. When I was in treatment, I was struggling to connect that first time in 2004. And I was stomping around the treatment centre one afternoon. An amazing therapist pulled me into his office and said what was wrong. And I was, at that time, spitting blood at my father, because I always, for the first early part of recovery, thought that my father was to blame. He was the one that had demanded apologies, controlled our family like he did the ratings on the decks of his ships many years previously. So he said, sit down, Mark, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'd like you to go out into the garden and I'd like you to think about it, and then we'll talk about it later. Is that all right with you? So I said, yeah, sure. So he turned to me and he said these immortal words. A man cannot give you what he does not have to give. And 14 years later, I can add to that, but nor can a woman. Society loves to demonize the man. I have put my mother on a pedestal for most of my life. Some of you men in the audience may have done the same thing. And nothing wrong with that. But when a woman is silently, toxically enmeshing with you and not protecting you, it is just as damaging as any man who might be physically beating you or whatever. At least that's what I believe, because that's what I now can relate as to contributing to most of my dysfunction. Interestingly, when I was speaking to the father of a client recently, he came up with this comment, which saddened me, but also is very telling. The first thing out of his mouth on the phone, I don't know how to take it from here, because it is our son's issues, not ours. Well, anyone in this room who believes that, I would invite you to do a little more work, because I'm not sure you're going to help your clients if you believe that. So, where did that leave me? Left me, as I mentioned, at the beginning of recovery. Recovery started in 2004 for me. Checked into treatment, and yes, we talked about the abuse at school. I didn't know about Nanny Berwick. I mean, to me, she was still a hero in that stage. We talked about what was done to me in my prep school and some of the behaviours, but unfortunately, what it didn't do, what I now know today it did not do, was get to the core issue, the feelings associated with what was done to me. To start using my heart, to not be living terrified through the lens in which was etched into my head, to my mind. So recovery was about recovering me. This is what recovery is about. That today is what I do understand it to be about. It's recovering me and my soul, which I did a damn good job of burying under 10 tons of concrete through the first 4 years of my life. So is it any wonder I could not connect to myself? Is it any wonder I had absolutely zero accountability? I didn't stop to even consider the consequences of one girlfriend after another, who I would fall in love with, manipulate, gaslight, convinced she was the woman of my dreams, and then as soon as I got bored, start doing things behind her back. The pattern, the repeating process of which my lecture is entitled, was like a bloody hamster wheel. Went round and round and round. And what was bearing everything? This is what was bearing everything. This is what has driven my addiction. This is what I believe is the engine of addiction. It's gasoline to a car. It is gasoline to addiction. I've spent many, many years building ever increasing amounts of shameful behavior. And of course, the further into it I got, the better I got at hiding it. The more I believed I had a right to do it. Richard Challen abused Sally Challen for 31 years, but she still loved him. Where is the common sense in that? Some of you who may even have experienced abuse will be sitting there going, well, there is no logic. But unfortunately, this is how we behave as human beings. Until we learn, till we wake up, till we get conscious. We go through all the old things. I'm not whatever enough, good enough, smart enough, pretty enough. I grew up believing I wasn't worth a penny because my father told me for 10 years I was a waste of his money because my school results were so appalling. We now know why, that he just told me I was a waste of his money. On the back of all of that, I spent most of 40 years mistaking intensity for intimacy, believing that intensity was intimacy. Have a guess, stab in the dark guess, what type of sex I went chasing in my addiction. One word. Sorry? Violent sex, thank you. Yeah. It's called BDSM, domination, whatever you want to call it. Is it any surprise that I took great comfort from being tied up when I was never held as a child? If someone wanted to stand there, lash me so that I couldn't move a finger, in that, and then blindfold me, in that space, I was safe because I was wanted. And then whatever she did to me after that, I didn't care. If she was touching me, she must love me, right? No, wrong. I know it now. Intimacy is very different to intensity, but I was terrified of it because I was never shown it as a child. So how can I be intimate if all I was shown was violence, anger, and terror? Sometimes we end up the collateral damage in someone else's war against themselves. Every single relationship I've had has fallen foul of this slide. Every single woman who's ever tried to love me has done their utmost to disconnect with me. But why would I want to connect with the female of the species when deep inside my subconscious I hated you and I was terrified of you? How was I ever going to connect? I wasn't. How many times did I apologize? How many times did I beg a woman not to leave me? Stand there in floods of tears and cry and make an apology. But an apology without change is just manipulation. As children, we all are narcissistic. We all look for comfort. We all look to be taken care of. We want that. And so we should. But if we don't get it, well then of course, as an adult, you go looking for narcissistic supply. What better supply for me than the underbelly of London? Sex clubs, fetish clubs, you name it. I've plumbed it for 30 years. That's what gave me my supply. That's what made me feel good. I could cavort around a club wearing virtually nothing. And trust me, in a pair of 4-inch thigh boots, a guy at 6'8" gets noticed. So I got the attention I never got as a child. Was it healthy? Was I really there for good reasons? No, of course not. I was there because I was desperate to be seen. Utterly desperate. Behaviours become patterns. Patterns can become problems. Problems breed addictions. This is something I just happen to believe. Where we place our thoughts is where we place our energy. So when you start thinking about something, that's where your energy is going to go. This isn't rocket science. It is science, but it's not rocket science. It's very basic 101. I went to a fascinating 2.5-day workshop in Edinburgh a month ago, given by a guy called Dr. Joe Dispenza. He has this amazing slogan: the same thoughts will always lead to the same choices. The same choices will always create the same behaviours. The same behaviours will produce the same experiences. The same experiences will create the same emotions. Those same familiar feelings and emotions will drive those exact same thoughts. And guess what? That's where we end up. Round and bloody round we go. So, what's going to break that cycle? I'm sure you're all familiar with this wonderful diagram. I've gone round this too many times to remember. I've played the persecutor, because when a woman tries to love me, that's all she did, all she had to do, eventually my threshold for her gentleness would fill, and I would turn to silent treatment, passive-aggressive comments, and if she pushed me too far, rage. And then, of course, I go to victim. I burst into tears and go, I'm sorry. And then she'd start crying and try and take care of me. Then I go to rescue. How many times have I been around this triangle? Well, there is a healthy side to this triangle. I happen to be a coach working with men in my profession. So my rescuer has become a coach. My victim has become a creator. And my persecutor has become a challenger, mostly of myself. These days I like to challenge myself. These days I do stop and ask, why? As a coach, one of the things I have to be is this. I have to have honesty. Interestingly, I stood here last year at iCAAD and gave a presentation. I was still acting out. I was still sending text messages to a woman in Sweden behind my girlfriend's back. It was discovering those text messages on the 6th of September that made her finally say, you know what? I'm done. It was the lying. It wasn't even the physical acting out at that stage. Well, I mean, it is physical acting out in terms of using my hands, but I hadn't actually had erroneous sex for a while. But the lying. And how could I still lie? I've been in treatment. I've been in recovery for 14 years. I've been to the jungle and discovered that my nanny abused me. Well, all the way through last year, having come back from the jungle, she came with me, by the way, very brave. She very fairly started asking me questions. So how do you think you were able to act out in that way and send me this very romantic text message an hour later? How were you actually mentally able to do that? I had no answer at the time. Today I do. Today I can stand here and say, I learnt very young to split the truth, to tell people what they needed to hear. I became so good at it, I didn't even know I was lying. I doubt Richard Challen had any inkling of what Sally Challen was suffering through 31 years. I have not been an honest man. I have lived for half a century as a liar. The 6th of September last year was my D-Day. I drove to those cliffs because I hated myself so much because of what I had done. The consequences of my actions finally caught up with me like a tsunami that I'd been keeping just behind me for 50 years. Of course, the truth does set you free, but it's going to hurt. And since the 6th of September last year, I've been back in treatment to an amazing place in America who literally saved my life. And I finally, for the first time ever, faced the consequences. I'll tell you what did it. It was sitting in that treatment centre, listening over a course of 6 weeks to about a dozen women, sitting there describing what had been done to them. And with the exception of the women who'd been raped physically, which I've never done, thank God, I heard them describing me in virtually every other behaviour they described. And when it was finally played back to me, I literally broke apart. If we cannot start to recognise why we've done these things, if we don't do our work, how can we help other people? And one key thing that we need along this journey is compassion. I drove to those cliffs because I hated myself. And I was not going to hurt another person. I was not going to let another person hurt me. I was done. That's it. I drove to those cliffs very calmly, with great peace in my heart. It's taken me the last 7 months of working through to get to this lectern today to find some compassion, and I believe I found it. There's a lovely quote. I actually went to a compassion workshop last week. You can't make this stuff up. Given by an amazing guy called Professor Paul Gilbert. This is his quote: "Compassion is the courage to descend into the reality of human experience." Well, my reality was a myth up until the 6th of September last year. I knew how to talk a good talk. I have received a terrifying amount of therapy since June 2004. I've had some amazing people help me. But I have sat with one therapist for over a decade and lied to her by default to the fact I didn't tell her everything. Well, now I tell my therapist everything. And it's working because I've got curious. How can you know yourself if you're not prepared to get curious? How can you know yourself if you're not prepared to start asking some very, very painful questions? All through last year, as my beloved girlfriend would sit and healthily challenge me, ask me these questions, what I didn't know at the time, but what I know now, is every time she started, well, I'll call it confront. She wasn't confronting me, but that's how I saw it. So every time she asked me a question, how could you do this? Why do you think you were able to do that? Blah, blah, blah. I just, inside myself, I heard Nanny Berwick. I heard my mother. I heard the au pair girl who used to kick so badly under the table she resigned after 2 months in my mother's employ. I was about 6 at the time because I hated her that much. These are the people I've heard every time a woman in any relationship I've ever been in has just tried to love me. I suspect that I don't know Richard Challen's history. I suspect somewhere in his past. I do know that he was heavily into cars, and cars, from what I've read, probably were one of his main addictions, because that's all he put his time into. What happened to him as a child, I don't know. It will be a fascinating journey to find out. So I'm finally curious enough. I can stand here and I know why my rage was escalating through last year. Every time Sue's tried to get me to open up, to get curious, all she wanted to know was that I'd actually put a bit of time into working out why I've done these things to give her the assurance I might not do it again. I think it's pretty fair. But I couldn't go there because my wall came down, and despite the fact by then I even knew Nanny Berwick had abused me, I still hadn't got anywhere near getting accountable for my actions. I just wanted, she would say to me, can't we talk about this? No, come on, I've said sorry. Can't we just move on and forget about this? It was a favourite expression of mine all through 2018. She knew something was going on because she could see my anger escalating, and it was. I almost hurt her on one occasion, by accident. But that's how bad things were getting. She left me with unbelievable courage, and the bravest thing she did on the 8th of September, 2 days after D-Day, was write an epistle-sized email to my therapist, and then took the time over that weekend before she returned to America on the 12th of September to contact and meet with, if possible, some of my key friends who thought that Mark Drax was this cool, big, whatever guy, but did not know the truth. Well, now there is nobody in my life, including a cozy audience of you, who do not know what I was doing. So I can't hide anymore. And because there was, at last, no other lady waiting in the wings, no one in whose bosom to go drown my sorrows, I was forced to finally stop and go, what the fuck have I done? And for how long? And you know, the most painful part of the last 7 months has been facing me. And the time I've wasted, the money I've burned, the people I've abused. And that's where the compassion piece has become critical. Because if it hadn't, I would be dead. Because I wouldn't have wanted to live with that much shame. This is a word that's become very powerful in my life. By doing what I do for me, empowers me to do it for other people. I like quotes, as you probably noticed. Never try to compel others to change. Have them free, leave them free to change naturally and orderly because they want to. And they will want to when they find that your change was worthwhile. To inspire in others a desire to change for the better is truly noble. I don't think there's ever a time when this next quote is out of place. I'm sure some of you are aware of it. I'm sure some of you have used it and read it many, many times. What does it actually mean to you? Between stimulus and response, there is a space. You could be sitting at a stoplight and someone pulls away and cuts in front of you. You have two choices. You either wave a certain finger at them and scream bloody murder into your steering wheel and maybe flash your headlights, or you stop and go, he's clearly in a hurry. I doubt he did that because he hates me personally. Let it go. Well, won't surprise you to hear that for most of my life, I've been the waving the middle finger kind of guy. Today, I do stop and ask, why? What's going on? And so in that space lies our power to choose our response. And my response these days is a very much more measured response to that which I've sadly dished out onto countless women and some men, but mostly women, and you probably understand why now. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I do finally feel free. It's a weird feeling. I gave a presentation in San Francisco earlier this year to a group of women at the invitation of a friend of mine who's been helping me through the last 7 months. She said, come talk to my women's organization. I was in America at the time, and I said, okay. And I stood there in front of a room of women, which you can probably understand now should have been terrifying. But for the first weird time, I consciously sat there as they introduced themselves to me, saying, why am I not nervous? Doesn't make any sense. Why am I not nervous? It was going through my head. And when I got into the car with this friend of mine later that night to drive back to where I was staying, I said, I've got it. I know why I wasn't nervous today. And I know why I'm not nervous standing here in front of you. It's because I no longer fear that you're going to see right through me. And standing in that room, almost exactly a year ago, I was terrified. Before my presentation last year, I was sweating buckets, my heart was going, I was absolutely on the edge. I didn't know why, but that is why. Whoops. Because I was terrified that I was a fraud. So I actually owe iCAAD an apology, which I hereby tender, because I was not healthy, not in my opinion, when I stood here last year. And I wouldn't be here now, being dishonest with you, if I hadn't got healthy, because you'd get another load of bullshit. This is a picture of my beloved mother and father. A question that has finally been answered. Did they do a good job? Good, define good how you will. Well, possibly not all the time. They gave me materially everything a man could wish for. But I would sacrifice every penny I've ever been given for a little bit of self-esteem and the ability to know how to love myself. But did they do their best? 100%, in my belief. I made peace with them both before they died. My father on the 4th of July 2017. I actually made peace with him in 2014. My mum a little later. Oh, this will be hard. I spent the 3rd of January this year with my aunt in Scotland. I determined I needed to understand my mother, and she was past being able to help me. So, I spent 4 hours with an aunt, who's very complimentous, luckily, on the 3rd of January, and I got the truth. The things she told me that day changed my life. She helped me understand what my mother went through as a child. As I heard her relate things she insisted never leave my lips and they won't even hear, my anger for my mother fell away. On what would turn out to be her last weekend alive, on the 16th, 17th and 18th of February this year, I sat by my mum and I told her my truth. I made peace. She looked at me on Monday the 18th of February this year. The way she looked at me that day, she'd never, ever done in 50 years. I know she's at peace. I know I'm at peace. My tears are tears of joy, because I can let it go and I can move on. I now am able to help other people. It's taken a long time. That's a pretty critical slide. Discernment versus blame. I blame them. Right up until 4 days before my mother died, I was blaming her. I blame my father for most of my life, angrily, physically almost putting him against a wall one day in my rage. How do we get from this to this? Well, I hope in a very short amount of time. I could talk for a week about this. I've had to condense. I've got 72 slides here. I don't know how I've got through them. I could speak for a week on each slide. But I wanted to give you the benefit of helping you understand that if we don't do our work, we will repeat the behaviours we never stop to repair. And if we are doing that, how the hell can we really healthily help our clients? I love this quote. I stumbled across it online. If you don't heal from what hurt you, you will bleed on people who didn't cut you. The brave lady who set me free on the 6th of September last year deserves an Oscar in bravery and courage for setting me free with compassion and love and exposing me in the only way she knew would help me heal. I will never stop loving her, and I wish things could be different. You are only as sick as your secrets. This I know to be true. We will keep repeating what we choose to ignore. and don't stop to repair. When I fell over last year, I went to an amazing place in America. Am I allowed to state names, or is that? No? I went to Onsite in Tennessee, which I happen to believe is one of the best, if not the best, treatment centres on planet Earth. They saved my life. And when you leave them, after you've been there a period of time, they give you a thing called the commencement ceremony. And they sit you down in front of all your peers. And your peers get a chance to talk to you and say whatever they want to say about you, hopefully nice things. And you get a chance to respond. I knew that I was going to fail to keep a level head and be able to hold it together. So I wrote them a poem of my time in recovery, but also at that point finding me able to reflect back over life. My relationship with my inner child has been terrible. This is an amazing piece of art made out of concrete rebar, sat on the playa at Burning Man in 2015. Some of you may have seen this image. To me, it speaks volumes of what we've all done. How often have we turned our back on our partner? But even more often, how many times have we turned our back on our inner children? How many times have we ignored ourselves? How many times have we done things using this and not this? Ignored our heart, and by default, therefore, ignoring ourselves. Might be pleasing other people, but I'll be pleasing ourselves. So I love this image. It speaks to me buckets about the important relationship with our inner child. I'm being told to hurry up. I've got 8 minutes. I know I started late minutes. I've got about 6 minutes to go. So I'm going to play you a song, which I will cut short to respect the timekeeping. But I invite you for 2 minutes to close your eyes, and I want you to imagine you standing looking into the eyes of your inner child. That's my invitation to you while I play you this song, all right? Of course, I need my trusty iPhone. Unfortunately, this didn't work too well when we tried it on the PA system from my computer. So, close your eyes and just listen to this song for 2 minutes. And imagine that you're standing staring into the eyes of yourself. Okay?
Are those your eyes? Is that your smile? I've been looking at you forever, yet I never saw you before. Are these your hands holding mine? Now I wonder how I could have been so blind. And for the first time, I am looking in your eyes. For the first time, I'm seeing who you are. I can't believe how much I see when you're looking back at me. Now I understand what love is. Love is. For the first time. Oh yeah. Can this be real? Can this be true? Am I the person I was this morning? And are you the same you? It's all so strange. How can it be? All along this love was right in front of me. And for the first time, I am looking in your eyes. For the first time, I'm seeing who you are. I can't believe how much I see when you're looking back at me.
I leave you with a poem. This is my poem that I used to say goodbye. Remember, I was getting on a plane the same night. Truth. Without it, we have nothing, or so my father taught me. And hence my confusion as terror and delusion defined my early years with fear, shame, and tears. Lies led to secrets, secrets led to lies. A safe way to live, I thought, through my defiant eyes. Beat me, punish me, take away my toys. But more fool you for never looking beneath the noise. And so I did it my way for almost 50 years. Countless tears and broken hearts as I plundered endless parts of lives, only ever trying to share a tenth of what I had already taken. Truth? What truth? If they really knew the truth, they'd discover all my lies and then despise me almost as much as I despised me through my blinkered, defiant eyes. Lies to cover lies, a lifetime of secrets and lies. And for what? To not feel a lifetime of painful feelings and maintain the illusion of perfect sunny skies. Give feelings false ceilings with secrets and lies, and watch with pain and fear as joy crumbles and dies. Kick or scream or rage or throw things about, but life will never better until the truth comes out. We fear to feel and make things real and choose to live in pain. Of course, it is all for nothing when rock bottom strikes again. And then one day, broken and grey, hopeless and dangerously weak, and when our pain resembles smashing our head against walls of solid teak, we finally choose life, not a lingering death. We surrender to avoid taking a final breath. And through a hunger to learn and freedom to seek the truth, we finally start to speak. And as we speak, we learn from each other. The damage inflicted by hurting father and mother, we expose shame forced upon us like an unwanted meal. Now determined to live, grow, change, and heal. It's time to renew and make different choices, to herald a life full of different voices. We spent years burying feelings, denying true selves, and living in doom. Now is our time to step into the light, out of the gloom, and to take up the fight. To believe in ourselves and seal the addict's tomb as we cast off life's shackles to heal, shine, and bloom. I arrived a month ago in despair and shame, a dark cliff having almost ended my half-century game. You've held me, trusted me, and seen past the lie. You've comforted me, listened to me, and never ceased to inspire. You've opened your hearts with courageous stories that have shown me how to live in honour and sacred glory, to value the soul, to keep it safe and respected, to cherish all life, considered and protected. To securely attach, we need safety and connection. With you all, this has been so easy, thanks to all the kindness and affection you've bestowed upon me without a hint of rejection. I will carry you all deep in my heart for the rest of my life, drawing upon your strength as I follow my dream to one day embrace and cherish a wife. For now, it's time to say goodbye. And as I head for the night skies above, I thank you all from my healing heart. And I offer you my unconditional, safe, sacred love. Thank you.